What I'm here to talk to you about today is the attacker's perspective, essentially. As you know, today is a blue team event, so it's all about defending against those mean red team guys that usually try to take down our networks or make blue team's lives a bit hard. If I may ask for a quick show of hands, who here has 20 years of experience in doing pen tests? No one? Sense? 5? Who would like to have 20 years of experience in pen tests? I'm not coming on yet. So I don't have any exact numbers for the UK, unfortunately, but I know, for example, Germany, we have roughly 700 pen testers that are certified as ethical hackers of the highest levels. There's a few organizations that offer training and certification. They're not really comparable exactly, but basically it's the same. It's 700 people for a country of 85 million people. And as you know, we have a huge landscape of companies. And if you want to have someone run a pen test, and there's like 715 people there that you have to share with the rest of the industry, you can imagine how difficult this is and how expensive that is. And this is where we come in. In Horizon 3, in our product NodeZero, it's all about the attacker's perspective, essentially. In the military, there is a term that's called turning the map around, which goes back all the way to Napoleon, actually. He often did a little exercise with his officers before they went into battle, that they quite literally turned the map around and looked at the battlefield from the perspective of their opponent, and then would try to get into their mindset. What would I do if I were on this side of the map, and if I wanted to attack someone? What would be my thoughts? What would be my tactics? And then would think about how to counter these. And what we do is essentially enabling you to do the same, but from an attacker's perspective in the IT world. So from a red team or a real malicious hacker or someone similar, essentially. And what we find is, like with criminals, if you ask like a criminal investigator or someone like that, they will tell you the criminal as well as a red team, that they typically have a way different way of thinking and different mindset than we, the good guys, have. So it's sometimes quite hard to get into that mindset. But this is where NodeZero will help you. What it is about is essentially, if you look at our two founders that founded the company, which are Snehal and Tony, they have very different backgrounds. Snehal, he's the typical corporate guy. He was a CIO at GE Capital, I believe the youngest ever. Then he moved over to Splunk, was CTO there for a while. In my theories, he made enough money there, so he said, let's do something way worse in pay, but probably way more interesting in the working environment. He actually moved over to become the first civilian CTO of JSOC. For those of you that don't know what JSOC is, it's basically a branch of the US Department of Defense, and it's the Joint Special Operations Command. So they're looking after all those special operating units like the SEAL teams and stuff like that. And this is where he actually met Tony, who was his deputy CTO there. Tony basically had a military background all his life, so they both met there. And as always, when you run an organization like this, at some point you start talking, and what they both figure is that they both, in all their time in their careers, never were in a situation where they could at any random point in time tell to their superiors, their bosses, whatever, are we secure or not at this point in time? They just couldn't. I'm not sure if I asked you, if your CEO calls today, or your board or someone like that, are you 100% certain, obviously there's no 100%, are you reasonably certain that we are safe at the moment? If we did everything right, if we configured the technology we have in the correct way, are we safe from an attacker or not? And I would expect most people wouldn't be able to answer this with a good gut feeling to say, yeah, of course, we're sure nothing will ever happen. I bet my job on this. I wouldn't, but yeah, maybe interested. So they figured there was not really any way to get a good answer here. And then when they looked at the market, what kind of solutions were out there, they noticed that there is not one single technology available that can do that. If you look at the classics, the first thing that typically comes into mind is vulnerability management. What they figured there is, just because my vulnerabilities can report something as being vulnerable, it does not necessarily mean that it's actually executable or has any real life, real world kind of application because it's often very theoretical. And it's for sure not a complete picture because CVEs, vulnerabilities, is not by far not the only way how an attacker nowadays compromises networks. Actually, more than 75% of the cases where someone reached a network successfully, it's no longer based on exploiting a CVE anymore. It's other things. The second thing they looked at were breach attack simulation solutions. And what they figured there is they can't really put that in their networks with total coverage because typically with BAS solutions, you have to install agents on everything you want to be included into one of those simulations. But you have all kinds of devices that you simply can't install an agent on. You have IoT devices, you have appliances, you have devices that are in your control from a third party or that you, for whatever reason, are not allowed to put an agent on. Or maybe there is not available for that kind of operating system that's on that device. And even if you were able to do that, breach attack simulations are typically only as intelligent and as good as whatever writes the attack surveillance and scenarios for that. So it's, again, depending on a human component. And if you have someone who's very good, you get pretty good coverage. If you have someone who's not that good, you don't get as good as a coverage. And the third one, which is the solution most organizations would like to go to, then typically is traditional, let's say, human pen testing. But there again, if we come back to my first few sentences, it's always a resource issue. You can't afford a pen tester to be in your network 365 days a year. The typical organization will have a pen tester in there, if at all, maybe once or twice a year, and then they typically have some time budget that they're allocated to spend with you, which might be 5 days, it might be 10 days, but it won't certainly be 300 days or something like that. So this will always be an incomplete snapshot from a time point of view because you will have a statement that is only reflecting this point in time when he was there. It does not tell you anything about 3 months from now. And the second issue is they typically don't have the resources to look at all your 5 or 50 or 500,000 devices with the same level of scrutiny than those 10 that they randomly picked to look at, for example. And this is why they came up with basically a product idea that they then created once they submitted Horizon 3, and that product is called NodeZero. And what does that do? It's essentially in what we call autonomous penetration testing solution. So it does not rely on any kind of manual intervention. It does everything on its own without anyone telling it what to do. It does not rely on any crowdsourced resources like some other products do, where you might have some totally stranger basically doing pen tests and you have like a middleman that is just making the connections for you. It's not just automated, it's what we call autonomous. What I mean between the difference of being automated and autonomous is that most automated solutions out there, they will rely on some predetermined way of doing things. It's either scripted or you add playbooks or something like that. NodeZero is focusing completely on machine learning, so it does not have any predetermined ways to go. It will figure that out on its own and will basically build on its experience in all the pen tests it did in the past. And it has actually done more than 20,000 pen tests already, more than several thousand last year alone, and it builds up on this experience. So you don't need any consultants for it. You don't need to install agents on everything you have, like with breach attack simulation. And you don't need to have a lot of know-how to teach it how to work. So there's no scripting or something involved in it. And it being as advanced as it is, it can actually find not only individual vulnerability, but actually has the capability to chain together different totally independent weaknesses to achieve, for example, a vulnerability, to achieve an impact that otherwise wouldn't require someone to have like 10 or 20 years of experience to know if I combine this weakness with that weakness in this specific scenario, I can do something or not. And it will not only tell you what is wrong, it will also help you prioritize what to fix and fix what matters. So not only what to fix first, and it will also help you to determine what not to fix, because that is to it with an even more difficult question, and not what do I need to fix, but where can I draw my red line of risk acceptance, where saying the risk of the remaining weaknesses is so low compared to my limited resources that I have available to do the fixing, that this is something I'm willing to accept, that I have a good understanding before I make the decision that this is actually more or less safe for me to do. I will show you a demo in a few minutes where you will see what I mean, and also how this will help you to verify things and to report compliance, for example, to your regulators or your board if that's required. Before we do that, I want to give you a quick example of what NodeZero can do. And it's very effective time-wise. We just recently had an example where we did a pen test at a customer, and NodeZero was able to achieve a domain admin level access, so essentially an AD compromise in roughly 7 minutes without triggering any alerts in this point. And as it is basically a machine doing all the work, it will take you less than a minute to kick off one of those pen tests once you have done it once or twice. And this also means you're no longer required to have those long times between pen tests, like every year or every half a year or something like that. You can run essentially as many pen tests as you like. And this enables you to shift from basically a reactive approach to a very proactive approach, and something we call a find, fix, verify loop. Again, I will show this in the demo in a minute, what I mean by that. But the nice thing about it is that it really helps you improve your security posture proactively before you actually get breached. And because you have this short cycles between pen tests, you actually have a very quick response if your fixing efforts were actually successful or not. Not like today, if you have a pen test today, you get a whole list of stuff that you have to fix, and then the guy comes back 6 months later. In the meantime, you don't really know if you probably fixed it or if you forgot something or the fix didn't work, for example. Okay, let's jump into the live demo. Let's see if I can get this up here. Okay, in the interest of time, I already logged into the product. You should be able to see that quite well. Yeah. Something that I didn't talk about till now is NodeZero is not only autonomous, it's also a cloud-based solution, so it's a service offering, which means it's located and residing completely in the cloud, so you don't need to have any big infrastructure for it, any powerful lines or anything like that. All the heavy lifting, all the compute and everything is done in the cloud. And what's important to note here, as you might be able to see, I think it's big enough, as you can see, the URL I accessed, it's a .eu. So this is actually our international instance of NodeZero, which is hosted completely in Germany. So it's fully GDPR compliant. You guys will already being in the EU. This does not really affect you specifically, but as you know, GDPR is one of the strictest data privacy laws there is. It's completely run by the German legal entity of Horizon3, with a local data privacy officer, with the local general manager, and every resource is local within Germany. So we're not affected by things like the US Cloud Act or something like that. If you have customers, for example, that have concerns with that, or if you yourself want to recently have a concern that I don't really want to have my stuff up there for anyone to get access to, this is the best kind of the most strict kind of data privacy regulation you can get in the cloud. It being in the cloud, of course, has a lot of benefits. So you don't have to take care of things like maintaining it. There is no updates required that you need to do. And it's also not limited in terms of what and how often we can do things. It's actually based on an annual subscription, and it's like it all you can eat. You can run as many pen tests as you like, as often as you like, in parallel sequential, for as long as you like. It doesn't care if you have a small network, but the pen test is maybe done in half an hour, or if you have a network of 50,000 or 150,000 nodes, that will take maybe a few days. It will look at every single one of those 150,000 IPs with the same level of diligence that it did the first one. Something that normally a human pen tester never would be able to do because it just doesn't have the bandwidth and the resources. NodeZero doesn't care. we quite often run pen tests where we find some strange weaknesses, where the customer says to us, this is impossible, we fixed this like 18 months ago. But we find, yeah, they fixed this on 4,998 of all their servers, but they missed 2, where the patch for whatever reason did not go through properly or something like that. For a human pen tester, it is almost impossible to detect. For NodeZero, who's looking at every individual machine, it's quite easy and quite obvious. And as you know, an attacker only has to be right once. You as the blue teamer, you have to be right all the time in order to protect something. The entire product was designed in a way that it can be used by basically anyone. You don't need to have pen testing background or experience. Of course, it does hurt if you have, but it's not necessary. Anyone in IT that has heard of what a network mask is basically can use this. And it's actually designed in a way to make it as easy as possible. To give you an example, we have a couple of different kinds of pen tests that you can run with it. As I mentioned, if you've configured one once or twice, it's a thing of less than a minute to do so. We have 2 major kinds of pen tests. We have an external and an internal pen test. The external pen test is basically looking at your external attack surface, like how little you expose the infrastructure, and this one is coming completely from out of the cloud. So it's a bit like attack surface management test there, which I would recommend being essentially like an add-on to the way more interesting internal pen test. Why I'm saying this? For the past couple of years, we all hopefully moved away from an approach where you try to manage your attack surface and try to get your wall around your castle and the moat with the crocodiles in it as efficient as possible. Because if you have the modern IT infrastructure, that wall won't be as impregnable anymore as it was. There will be small openings there for cloud solutions or anything like that. It's no longer possible to totally basically cut you off from the internet. The way more conservative approach is to assume someone will reach you at some point in time of injury. It's a matter of time and effort of someone. Of course, if you're only like part of a shotgun approach attack where you have one target of thousands, the risk is pretty low. But if someone really is looking at you and wants to attack you specifically, it's a totally different story. We are, unfortunately, in a wartime mindset in the internet or IT nowadays. As you probably have heard, a lot of the companies that, for example, pulled out of Ukraine had been targeted by cyber attacks, or someone up or down the supply chain from them has. A few days after a lot of people from Russia were put on no-fly lists, for example, a lot of airlines were attacked. And there is always a certain risk that you produce something or you offer a service to someone that is on someone's list. And so even if you say, I have a very exotic kind of business model, no one will attack me directly, they might be interested in hurting someone that you sell something to or someone that you buy something from. So even if you can't think of a reason why someone would attack you, someone else might. And once someone is really looking at you specifically, it's a different story. So you have to assume someone needs to enter your network in some way. It might be the employee that falls for a phishing email. It might be someone is bribing someone to plug in a USB stick somewhere. It will happen if someone tries. And this is where the internal pen test comes in. The internal pen test runs under the assumption that someone already breached your network and is then trying to move laterally from that compromised system to other parts of the network. Again, totally autonomous. As we are primarily in the cloud, we can, of course, achieve that by just being in the cloud, which means for the internal pen test, you will actually need a small component inside of the network, which is a Docker container. For those of you that don't know what Docker is, it's essentially like a small virtual entity that will be under the control of a cloud component, and the cloud will essentially tell it, do this kind of scan to this kind of attack and report the results back. All the decision making, all the storage and everything will still be in the cloud. But of course, in a safe way. We have a lot of safeguards in place. Every of our customers has their own DPC in the cloud, which means There is no shared resources there. You're not sharing a database server with someone else. So there is not really a chance for data to be displaced to another customer or something like that. Every pen test is actually running in its own virtual container. And once the pen test has been completed, it will automatically be deleted once the reports have been generated. So we are very careful when it comes to data. And of course, all the data is encrypted all the time, at rest and in transferring whenever we are involved with that data. To show you how easy it is to configure a pen test, I'll do just that with you with an intro pen test as an example. The only mandatory setting we have actually is you have to give the pen test a name. Everything else you can leave on default or you can change. You can, for example, define a scope. You can tell it, hey, only look for these kinds of subnets or these IP addresses in your attack, or exclude these ones we don't want or we can't test them for some reason. But you can also leave this empty and run this like what we call a black box test, where it will determine on its own which network it is in and which adjacent networks it might get access to through lateral movement, for example. You can also enrich the pen test. This is something that attackers would do typically as well, to gather what's called OSINT information or open source intelligence information. This is where essentially an attacker would do its homework before he does the actual attack. He will gather information about the company that then can be used to customize or tailor the attack to the target. And if you, for example, provide us with a couple of domain names or company names that you use, we will use the data to do just that, to customize, for example, brute force attacks. We will create customized password lists based on this information. We will also take this information to do our own research. For example, specifically, we will take your company names and go out to LinkedIn. We'll figure out who is working at your company, or at least claiming to do so on LinkedIn, and then no one use their names, again, as part of the test. There's many ways on how to use this data to get a higher chance of hitting something, and we can do essentially just that. You can, of course, as well fine-tune what kind of attack you want to do. By default, the attack configuration is done in a way that this is safe to run in production, which means you can run this during regular office hours without a maintenance window or anything like that, with a very limited risk. There's never 100% certainty. Of course, we have a very limited risk of anyone ever noticing that you're doing it. We, of course, also have more aggressive tests, which we would also recommend of doing, but then, of course, doing a maintenance window. Then you have a few more fine-tuning things you can do, but nothing major. And then all you need to do is essentially review what you've did, confirm that this is what you want to do, and either save this as a template for future use, or now run the pen test. And if I click Run Pen Test, what will happen is that a new pen test will be provisioned here. This is, again, as I said, in its own virtual container that will be spun up from scratch. So every single component, every microservice will be created specifically just for this pen test. It will be torn down afterwards so that we can ensure that no data remains. And once the pen test has been basically configured and spun up, it will start and do its work and will eventually stop at some point. The nice thing is that at this point in time, there's nothing more we need to do besides waiting for it to complete. So there's no human interaction required. You don't have to tell it go left or right or attack this thing. It will do totally autonomously. And if you, for example, create a schedule to run this specific pen test every other Monday, it will do just that. And you don't have any work with it besides having to, if you want to look at the report afterwards. And the nice thing about this being so easy is that you can now really move to total coverage and approach. Moving away, of course, from a once a year or once a semester kind of pen test to other setups. We have different customers that do different things. We have a lot of customers that do something like they do patching Tuesday and then pen testing Wednesday, for example. We have other customers that run a different pen test every day. Because what's nice, nowadays modern networks, internally, everyone will hopefully have adopted a zero trust approach. So you will have different segments internally. As you can imagine, the success rate or the chance of succeeding with an attack might depend to a significant component on where the initial range happens. So does the attacker compromise a user's workstation? Is he compromising a database server? Is he compromising server in the accounting department, or is he compromising one of your printers or a webcam or something like that? And typically, a human pen tester doesn't have the bandwidth to look at all those different what-if scenarios. With NodeZero, it's as simple as creating another pen test and putting in another one of those Docker containers in another segment, or moving it to that segment, which will take you a minute maybe to look at the same kind of scenario with a different entry point. And it allows you to have a way better and more complete picture. What actually a lot of our customers like as well, you can actually inject credentials into such a pen test. So, for example, if you run an internal phishing campaign and you have this one guy that always falls for your phishing emails, you can actually inject his credentials or a similar comparable set of credentials into a test to run a what-if scenario, like what would have happened if it was an actual phishing email that guy fell for, or for girl, of course, that he fell for. And a real attacker would now have those credentials. What could be happening? What kind of damage potential would that add? And you can just run this through, again, without any real work for you. The most thing you have to do is to create a set of matching credentials, essentially. And once it's complete, it will, as I said, automatically generate a report for you. And as we can't really wait for the other one to complete, I'll show you the report from a previous one. So, and I think it will be totally automated, the regeneration of the report. It's nothing you need to do besides if you want to read it. We have a couple of different reports that you can actually get access from here. We have like traditional PDF kinds of reports, starting with a little executive summary, very high level, C-level summary, which will only have a couple of pages with the most important information of this test. As you can see, this is only 6 pages long here. It could also be that you were more interested in the detailed pen testing report, which in this case for this test is like 86 pages long, so a lot of information here. In the interest of time, I will not show you every single page here, so a lot of detailed information. Or you can, of course, also use the web-based part of the employee. The problem with PDFs is they tend to be quite static, so you can't really drill into it. You can filter properly on beta in PDF, but you can do this in the actual web-based report. As you can see, it starts again with a quick summary. The summary is again like a high-level, C-level kind of summary of the results. In this case, it will only tell you what kind of critical impacts we achieve. But you can, of course, also get a lot of additional data here, and you can also, of course, drill down into data further. So to jump into, for example, the weaknesses, if I click on this, you will see all the 115 weaknesses we found in this test. And if you are familiar with things like vulnerability scanner reports, this might look familiar to you as well. It is actually quite different. And the reason why I'm saying this, if you've ever seen a vulnerability scanner report, in my experience, this is actually something that often has a ton of false positives in it. It's not rare that 50 to 90% of the results in there are purely academic. They're not really exploitable. Actually, only 2.4% of the entire bandwidth of known CVEs have an exploitable attack vector. The rest is only, yeah, it's technically there, but no one ever found a way to use it for something meaningful. So there is a ton of stuff in there that is not really of any value for you. So you have to have a highly skilled resource go through that report now and get rid of all those false positives for you. NodeZero has a different approach. NodeZero will actually first try to exploit every single weakness it finds, and only if that exploit, it's a benign exploit code that we will try to run, only if that is successful, this will be qualified as a true weakness, and only then it will be listed in this report, which means it saves you a lot of time, and everything that's in there has a whole different quality because it will ensure that this is something that you will actually have to take care of. The second big difference to a regular vulnerability scanner is that they typically only look for CVE, so regular vulnerabilities out of the list. But as I mentioned, most attacks nowadays, they don't base themselves on CVEs anymore. The attacker will live off the land. If he doesn't find the CVE, he will lose another kind of weakness. Stuff that I typically like to categorize as not following best practices. So things like security misconfigurations, weak passwords, default accounts being left in place, other kinds of credentials he somehow got his hands on, phishing emails, whatever. And as you can see here, the top 3 are actually not vulnerabilities. These are actually other kinds of weaknesses, which NodeZero is looking for just the same way as it is looking for vulnerabilities. So it will give you a much more complete picture of what's going on here. And the third one, unfortunately, in the interest of time, I can't really go into too much detail here, otherwise we would be here till tomorrow. The third one that I want to mention is the scoring. Most solutions out there will give you some kind of idea how severe a certain vulnerability is, how high on your to-do list it should be when fixed. But often they don't take into account your specific environment or the presence of other weaknesses. A weakness rarely is exploited on its own. A real attacker with this set of experiences, he will often, if necessary, combine different low-level weaknesses in a creative way to achieve a bigger impact. This is something those solutions usually don't account for. And NodeZero actually does that. If I quickly jump into one, here you will see that SMB signing, it's a typical candidate. Pretty much anyone has SMB signing of required problems in their networks. And this simply gets a base score of 1 out of 10 from most products, from us as well. But in this case, we actually raised this to a 10 out of 10 because NodeZero has the capability to understand that in this specific environment, this is actually way more severe because this is what the blue box is for. It will explain to you that it actually leveraged this specific weakness on this specific server to create 28 different attack chains that led to some or another kind of critical impact, like compromising the Active Directory or, for example, compromising hosts and so on and so on. So it again gives you a much better, realistic representation of how severe something is, which again otherwise would require a highly skilled resource to go through results that not only knows about vulnerabilities but also knows your environment to properly balance how severe is that for you. And quite often, at best, this is where most other solutions, especially the elderly ones, will end. They will show you a huge list of weaknesses. This is where NodeZero actually just begins to become interesting. Because the weakness is what I call the what. What is your problem? Certain weakness. But if I tell you, who unfortunately no one seemed to have like 20 years of experience in pen testing, if I now tell you, for example, you have a weakness, you're vulnerable for net virus and service poisoning, all you most likely will know now is that you're vulnerable to net virus and service poisoning. But what does that mean to you? That is missing. The so what is missing. You know about the what, but not the so what. If I tell you you left your car keys in your door when you left this, what was the name of the parking place? Doesn't matter. You will immediately know what the so what is. Someone might steal your car. If I tell you you're vulnerable for net virus and service poisoning, you will probably not know what this means. And this is where NodeZero becomes interesting because it will now take those weaknesses as part of its tool set to create actual real-life impact. It will exploit those weaknesses, and it has the capabilities to combine them in very complex ways. And this is what you can see in the Sankey diagram. If I highlight the net virus link service poisoning, you will see that by using it, it actually achieved domain compromises, host compromises, user compromises. It gained access to sensitive data. It used it to create ransomware exploitation scenarios, and so on and so on. And of course, again, we can drill down into this. If we go to domain impact ones, domain compromise ones, you can see that it actually found 4 different ways to compromise the Active Directory, which is again something that's different from hiring a human pen tester. As they have a limited time, they typically don't have the resources, if they found one domain compromise, to keep looking for other ways to do the same thing. They will move to some other kind of attack scenario to find more things because they already put a checkbox on this. If you now fix that one issue that they found, you might still have 3 more that you're just not aware of because you didn't have the time to look for it. NodeZero is relentless. It will try every different kind of combination of weaknesses and attack scenarios it can think of, and it will find a lot more, typically then give you a way more complete picture and tell you, hey, you actually have 4 different ways that you need to fix it. As you can see, 2 of these were actually exploiting regular CVEs. These are actually pretty boring, low-skill kinds of attacks. Every, let's say, script kiddie can do that. The other 2 that you can see here, we actually used regular, valid domain admin accounts from that customer to compromise the domain. And if we drill into this, you can actually see in detail what we did here. We will again get like a high-level narrative of the attack. And you will also get, I'm sure, that's bigger than on my screen, that you will actually see in detail how the attack chain looked at. As you can see, it actually combined different weaknesses with each other in order to achieve the domain compromise on the right here. And something that's also unique to NodeZero, you don't have to take its word for it. It's totally transparent. It will tell you exactly what it did, where it did it, and how it did it. So you can actually reproduce it without the product if you want to. So for example, we have the one major block here, which is it used this NetBIOS name service poisoning to gain access to a set of credentials. If you now have no clue what NetBIOS name service poisoning is, don't worry, you're in good company. Pretty much no one knows. But what you can do is you can just click on it, and NodeZero will tell you. It will give you a high-level explanation of what it is, essentially a man-in-the-middle attack. If you're one of those people like me that wants to know more, it will also give you references to all the different minor attack techniques we use, and you can now read up on it in great detail if you want to spend the time. And what's also quite nice, it will tell you in great detail which command it actually used to achieve this. In this case, this man-in-the-middle attack, to get basically how does this user's login token. This is what it did. It placed itself in the middle, and when the user tried to log in somewhere, it stole that from the network. As you can see, the hash we collected, we will not show it in clear text here. It will actually be obfuscated, so no one that has access to the report can exploit this in some way. We will only show you the first and the last 2 digits, so if you have the actual hash, you can compare it to it, but you can't use it to breach something or something like that. And this is now a good example where this economy at NodeZero kicks in. Every time NodeZero finds a new piece of information, it will kick off a new decision-making cycle to decide autonomously what would be the next best step for me to take this further. It doesn't rely on, oh, I did this last time, or someone told me I now have 3 ways to go further. It will base this on its own experiences. In this case, it decided, let's see if this hash actually came from a weak password. So let's send this hash to a hash tracker and see if we can compute the password out of it. And as you can see again in the proof, it was actually able to get the password out of it. Again, we only see an obfuscated version of it, but it now has the password. At this point in time during the pen test, for 14 minutes in, there's nothing for NodeZero to do with it. So it will place that puzzle piece in the pile. And as you can see, 10 minutes later, roughly up when it was 25 minutes in, it figured out, hey, there is an SMB service on this domain controller here. I found this guy with the password 10 minutes ago, so let's put those two together and see if I can actually log in here. And as you can see again in the proof, not only it's a bit mouthful because of a small screen here, but as you can see, not only were we able to successfully log in, NodeZero also determined this guy had actually access to admin level shares here, admin dollar, C dollar, IPC dollar. So this does not only qualify as I successfully compromised the user, this is actually a domain admin. So at this point, this qualifies as a domain compromise because I could now take over the domain, which of course we won't do, but you could at this point in time. To give you a comparison to the other user-based attack, this is a good example on how this actually differs. I can see in the data is probably too small. As you can see, we again based this on the NetBIOS name service poisoning attack. But this time, instead of relying that user chose a weak password, which was technically a second weakness, and technically there was a third weakness, that the domain policy allowed that user to choose a weak password, this time it combines it with a different weakness, the SMB signing not required, which essentially opens up every system that does not require SMB signing to a relay. Like with Home Alone, when Kevin replayed the videos or his voice recorder, that server has no way to authenticate it back. That recording that NodeZero made of that login attempt is genuine, so it plays it back and enables it to log into that server, and not only log into it, once it's successfully logged into it, it immediately dumped the local password cache, the SAN database, found 3 additional users, one of them a named administrator, which led to a certain assumption that this might be an admin as well, and then it chose to use this user to again log into the domain, and it again was able to compromise that. And this is only one example, as I don't have that much time, unfortunately, to show you everything. But this is one example of how NodeZero is able to combine weaknesses in very complex ways, which typically requires a lot of know-how to complete it. I will show you the attack chain of one of those CVE-based exploits. This is pretty boring in comparison. This is all found to CVE, applied to standard exploit, and done. This is something anyone can do. But the other ones, this is something where you need a certain level of skill. Right? NodeZero has that because of its experience in all those pen tests and the machine learning capabilities in it. And the construct is the same with all those different tests. So for example, if I go into the ransomware exposures, you will see that if I pick one of these, you will see that they are identical in terms of the representation. But in this case, you can see we actually combined 3 different strands of an attack chain to one in order to achieve something. So it's highly complex. It's nothing someone can do that doesn't have a certain background in pen testing. I can't go in much further into this, unfortunately. The external pen test essentially looks the same. Typically, the results are, of course, a bit different because you typically don't have access to domain controllers from the internet and stuff like that. But the construct is the same. You will get the same listing of weaknesses and impacts and the same key diagram to that. Something I wanted to show you before I sadly have to edit this is I talked about the find, fix, verify in the slides. Up until now, we basically only concentrated on finding stuff. We had a bit of fixing in here as well, because as I mentioned, the weaknesses, this is the stuff we can fix. We can't fix the impacts. We can only fix the weaknesses that are used to create the impact. But as I said, the list you get here is in way different quality than what you would get from a CVE scanner or something like that. So you already have a tremendous help in fixing stuff, because it will only show you what you actually need to fix, and typically in a proper order, and not only vulnerabilities, but also other stuff. But it doesn't end there. NodeZero actually goes further by telling you how to fix stuff. So it doesn't only tell you, hey, 10.0.220.51, the server has the net browser instance pointing the issue. If you go onto the Fix Action tab, you will see that it will actually explain to you in great detail what you have to do to actually fix it. So you don't have to go to Google, which is typically the way the ITers do find knowledge on other fix things. You can actually give this to the junior level engineer and say, hey, fix this. You also get a PDF wherein the all the fixes, by the way, so you can just hand this off, or we can create a ticket for whoever is responsible for that server, and they can now fix this. And then we come to the verification part of things, which is very important and often overlooked, and that is, after you fix something, you have to verify that you actually properly fixed it. We have tons of examples where we ran pen tests, and we found stuff that people thought they already fixed. And if we look deeper into it, there were all kinds of strange issues. We had one where there was a 2-stage patching process. First stage was changing stuff in the registry. Second stage was actually replacing binaries. But their EDR solution prevented the binaries from being replaced. Only on 2 out of 15 servers. No one knew why only these 2, but it prevented it. And their vulnerability manager did only look for the changes in the registry and reported everything as being done. Once NodeZero tried to exploit it, it figured out, oh, actually still there. So it's very important to verify that you've fixed stuff properly. Sometimes it's as simple as you forgot to reboot the server. And there's obviously a couple of ways to do that. You could run another pen test. This will, of course, show you it's still there. But if you ran a big pen test and it took like 3 days to complete because it was 20,000 IPs that you tested, or you had a ton of weaknesses that just need a bit of time to be verified, this is maybe not the most efficient way to do it. There's actually a much nicer way of doing it, and this is what we call the one-click verify option. So let's say your junior IT guy comes back and say, hey, I fixed this SLB signing issue based on this fix action instructions I got. All you need to do now is you say take action, add to one-click verify cart, and then this will open up a small shopping cart for you like Amazon. And you will just put in all the different issues that were reported fixed, let's say during the day or whatever kind of type redo you want to allot here. And at the end of that time window, all you do is you say run one-click verify, and then NodeZero will actually create a new dedicated, simply stripped down pen test version for you, and will only look if those weaknesses are still there. So you get a response typically in a couple of minutes or maybe an hour compared to a huge pen test. And we'll easily know, yeah, these 4 I can cross off my to-do list. Number 5, for whatever reason, is still there. So I have to revisit that and check if I made some mistake there. And one last thing I wanted to mention. Before I joined Horizon3, I was actually working for Palo Alto Networks. I was doing strategic accounts. So these guys, they made like 7 to 8 digit numbers of revenue with every year. And Palo Alto claims of itself of being like the market leader in next generation firewalls. They have the best of everything. And it might be true, it might be not. It's probably also a bit of an opinion thing. But something that we notice shockingly often is if we run NodeZero, it's not specifically tuned to be super silent and stealthy. Quite the opposite. We're more like the bonfire in the network. And surprisingly, almost never any kind of alert is triggered in customers' environments. And the reason is not that they don't have a fancy ER solution or something like that. It's that those solutions are not perfectly configured or they are not like trained or something like that. And something that's really nice about NodeZero is that for every host we attack, we will actually give you the detailed action log where it will specifically tell you at which point in time we send which kind of attack or which kind of command in the direction of this server. And our customers really like to put this side by side, for example, with their SIEM solutions or their EDR or some kind of security log they have to see what did I see from that attack. So this is somewhere between blue and purple teaming actually. What did I see? Did I see it? If I see it, why didn't I prevent it? Where do I need to increase or change my policies for the next time? Or if I didn't see it, why didn't I see it? Do I have a way to increase visibility? Can I add another sensor, or do I just need to increase the logging settings somewhere or something like that? So it even helps you to increase the value you get of the investments you've already made into security. Obviously, there is tons of stuff I couldn't show you in 45 minutes. I hope you got a good impression of what we're doing here and you liked it and I didn't confuse you too much. We will be here for the rest of the evening, so if you have any questions, just find me. I'll be somewhere in the back and see what kind of slacks are left. And yeah, thank you for your time. I'm done.